Okay, welcome back. We are sitting in front of a time-lapse session of a male torso sculpt, and I'm going to present a lot of the material for the course this way to spare you a bit of the tedium of watching me sculpt for hours and hours on end just to see a few intermittently interesting things, because a lot of the time that I'm sitting in front of ZBrush is building up forms, and really all you need to know, the take-home message of that, is the forms and where they start and where they go to. And I think that probably walking through this time lapse and annotating it in the appropriate places is probably the best way to get the information to you without it being unduly tedious and slow. Okay, so this is the time lapse session for the male torso sculpt, and I'm just going to go through this fairly slowly, and I'll talk about the interesting things as we go. Okay, so as you can see, this is kind of where we left off with the Z-spheres and the blocking. Okay, so we have roughly the torso, and we measured it. So the other video showed live in ZBrush how we use transpose to get the distances between the landmarks on the iliac crest and the pubic symphysis. We just get the size down a little bit up to here. All right, so we're looking at this distance, and then this complete distance. We measured the width here across to here, and then we also kind of try to conform as best we could the width across the widest point, narrowest point of the rib cage, right? So he's more or less straight up and down, so we'll consider those the same thing. Okay, so that's where we left off, and from here we'll see as I just kind of dart around. The first thing that I'm going to investigate, and you can see I've transpose masked halfway up the mesh, is that I'm going for a little bit more gesture to the waist, right? Because we have this oriented straight, and the torso is more or less oriented in the same way. But if we quickly look at the reference, we can see that he has a little bit more twist to him than that, especially in something like this. We can see that the torso is pointing kind of in this direction, and pelvis is pointing this direction. So whatever that is in degrees, it's a small offset, but we're going to achieve that in transpose here. Right, so transposing a Dynamesh is a little bit awkward because what you get is there's not a really good way to blur the mask unless you go in and paint it by hand. You can use the brush, kind of brush mask, mask pen tool, and that will soften it. But you'll see when we start to use more regular topology that you can do some really nice fade with the transpose tool. So after I've transposed, a lot of what I'm doing in this first little section is trying to take off some of this this twist and the broken parts of the form. Okay, so kind of in conjunction with that, I'm blocking in the obliques, right? So remember, we've already established the iliac crest going back, right? And so this is one of our critical landmarks that we established and we measured, the anterior superior iliac spine. We can tell, and we kind of know internally, the gesture of the iliac crest going back, right? It's up and then a descent down and finishes at the posterior superior iliac spines. We know the external oblique kind of sits as, well, the love handle sits as a mass here. Right, normally this spirals all the way back and gives you a nice teardrop shape going back to its insertion on the back ribs. But what you get when you have a twist in the pelvis versus the rib cage is you get this teardrop shape getting compressed, right? So if I just kind of block in the mass of these two as cubes, you can see that if we have an origin in, say, we'll try to make this a little bit more yellow. If we have an origin here on the iliac crest and its insertion is here, we're getting more or less a vertical kind of pull to this instead of the traditional kind of oblique directed backwards pull. Okay, so as I step forward, you can see that this starts to become a block going up on the side like this, right? As opposed to the spiraling oblique. Conversely, we'll see when we get to the other side that it's even more pronounced, right? As I just step backwards a little bit. This one is quite shortened, and the other one, in contrast, will have to be extra stretched, right? The two opposing sides of the body. Okay, we saw this in the block-in video. I'll mention it as I'm going along because it's up on the screen. S-shape of the clavicles as it goes back. Remember, we have the acromion process sitting out here, which is the start of the spine of the scapula. I'm way ahead of myself talking about this, but you'll see I really start to look for where I'm going to drop the acromion process, that little plate of bone that nothing grows on top of, because that's going to give me the starting point for my deltoids going off this way, right? So you can see I'm starting to block in some rectangular forms, right? And I'll build some deltoids up around those as I go. What you're seeing here is a little bit of form being put into the latissimus dorsi, right? So we know this nice graceful gesture going up, right? And it's going to the back. Well, it's going up to the humerus, but it's creating the back wall of the armpit, right? So this whole thing is more or less going to be latissimus dorsi, right? So it's all going to converge up there, so I'm blocking it in. And while I'm in the area, working my way around, taking the acromion process back to be the spine of the scapula. And then the medial border of the scapula going down, right? So these are the things that we always talk about blocking in the upper back area. Like you need those two landmarks. And the deltoid starting to spring off the different borders there. So the end of the clavicle, the lateral edge of the acromion process, and then the inferior border of the spine of the scapula. This is the far side of the obliques, what I was talking about a few minutes ago, which is kind of the contrast of this side and the extra stretch back versus the shortened side, which is on the other side, right? So that's what happens when you twist at the waist. And this little line that I've just drawn up here is the medial limit of the external obliques, right? So this is, it's called the semilunar line. It divides more or less as form the limits of the obliques out here and what ends up being the rectus abdominis on this side. Right, so that's what I've just blocked in with that little clay tube stroke. Massing up a little bit of external oblique. Look at the long twist as it goes back. Remember, these ribs are twisted far away from the origin down here on the iliac crest. Okay, you can see me start to block in, at least delineate the bottom border of where the pecs are going to go. And then start to establish some of the flow from the humerus down to the rib cage, right? So remember how the chest spans all the way up on the raised arm. And I'm blocking it in. Everybody who's been in the anatomy class is familiar with this form, right? The way this goes up. And then this, the abdominal section of the pectoralis major goes up and under, right? So that's why you're getting this very distinct difference in planes, right, on a raised arm. So I'm just putting a little volume into it and then looking at the same thing on the far side. Slightly different orientation of the arms though, so we have to consider the difference in pull and the difference in shape. This arm is projecting a little bit more forward. This one is pulled more back in line with the body. So this is going to be a little thinner, and this is going to be more fan-shaped as it comes back to the chest. More lats. Putting a little bit of the indication of the costal cartilage, and he is actually quite developed in his upper abdominal area. So if I just flip through these, you can see that he's slightly tensed as he's twisted. So a lot of the top 2-pack of the 6-pack is covering what would be the costal cartilage coming down here at the thoracic arch. Okay. So we're just gonna we can see that as I go through here, I'm not really defining rib cage in here, and that's part of the reason is that he's really thick through that area. Okay, so back on here, you can see I'm blocking in the rectus abdominis and paying attention to the asymmetry in them as we go. Right, this is all quite asymmetric, and it has some really unusual gesture as it goes up and down. Right, so we have to kind of be careful to capture that, because that's the individuality that varies from person to person. Putting his underwear on. Swimming trunks. And so you see I just blocked in, if this is the iliac crest, I've just started to block in some of the gluteal muscles down here. Right, and then this is going to be the strong, sharp ligament going from the anterior superior iliac spine down to the pubic symphysis down here. Okay, so those are the forms that I'm working on in that area. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff already blocked in, and now it's concentrated on getting the masses to be just right, and to get the plane changes. And a lot of this is looking at the contours from the reference, the silhouettes. Right, when you see me starting to rework some of this stuff here in the lats and the teres major going up, I'm really trying to capture this roundness, right, and that volume, but also this this silhouette, right? As he turns away, you start to get kind of a nice gesture, right? And that's what a lot of figure sculpture is. I mean, a lot of it comes back to drawing. You'll hear me say this again and again. Like, the more familiar you are with the contours of the body, you can really use that to your advantage as you rotate your models in different views and realize what's out of place. Okay, so just really quickly, you can see that I'm working around the acromion process with the anterior deltoid, this medial head, and the rear head coming back here. There'll be a bit of refinement still to go. And you see, as I go forward, I've just used the slice curve tool to cut off his stumps and make him nice and sharp. There's a little how-to video on that steps through that step by step. Dynameshed the rest of his body down and did a little slice there, so he'll have a nice sharp bottom edge to him as well. Okay, refining the contours of the external obliques, and this is leading me back into this region of the lower back, right? And we know that you have the lats coming down over top of all this, nice and thick up here. We also have serratus anterior coming this way. For everybody who hasn't done my anatomy course, this is probably getting pretty in-depth, but follow along as best you can and look at the Look at your anatomy books. Okay, so you can see these forms that I'm putting in right now. Those are quite obviously the spinal erectors, right? So this guy has pretty pronounced spinal erectors, our model. And so we're really getting those familiar forms, which is kind of the columns going up from the sacrum down here. And then this lateral mass. And I'll just show that to you on him, right? So just look at this. And then the columns going up. All right, so you get a strong sense of that here and here. Okay. So that's what we're looking at. Back to the front, you'll see me jump around. I should probably enforce a little more discipline on myself to work around consistently for your sakes, but I do tend to jump around on the model as I notice things that need revision and completion. All right, so I'll talk about it as I go, and we'll eventually get to the end. Bear with me. All the good stuff here, right? So chromium process, S shape of the clavicle. The outer third gives rise to the front head of the deltoid, going out to the humerus. And then we have this middle section, right? The middle 2/3 that gives rise to the clavicular section of the pecs. And that's going out and kind of converging with the front head of the deltoid. Interesting things happening on the biceps, right? You can see quite clearly the biceps getting blocked in, coming out from under the deltoid and the chest, right? So all of this kind of form going up, all of that snaking out to the outside of the humerus. And then as far as biceps go, we're looking at this. And we see I'm blocking in this form as well, which we know is the coracobrachialis, a little tube of muscle. And you'll see me do one more thing coming up, and I'll change colors. I'll go to something crazy like green for what we'll call the neurovascular bundle, which comes right along here and contains all of your arteries and your major nerves that go down to the arm, and they pop out of a little hole right there. So you'll probably see me block that in at some point in the future. Okay, moving forward, just trying to establish a little bit more of the form in the abdomen and get some of the block-like nature of the external oblique on this side, right? And as we move up with the external obliques this way, you know that we're no longer talking about this teardrop-shaped mass. We start to talk about digitations. And specifically, we have to start worrying about interdigitation with the the serratus anterior, which are coming out here. And he has very pronounced serratus anterior. You can see, and in fact, he has a little bit of asymmetry in his serratus anterior as well. So you have two very pronounced, and it's almost like he's missing kind of the characteristic third one. But on the opposite side, he has all three, right? So, and then this one is in line with the chest muscles. And this one's in line with the chest muscles going to the fifth rib. Okay? So blocking those in, taking care to orient them at the kind of the correct location forward, trying to keep them in line with the appropriate landmarks on the chest, like compare on the reference to where his nipple is and things like that, to just help you locate these. And they have a lot of volume in them, and they have some really unique kind of characteristics coming forward. When you think about really voluminous serratus anterior, you think about the form of them coming off of the scapula, because really we remember that those come off the bottom of the scapula, the underside of the scapula. So that's led me back here, right? So our scapula, if you remember, it's going to do really nice things. If I draw just the scapula, it's going to be up here like this. But we have this muscle coming off the bottom. And then we have, of course, the teres major coming up and out like that. You can see me working on the finish, kind of the termination of the rear deltoid, taking care not to extend it all the way to the spine of the scapula up here, which we know is where it originates from, because remember, it passes via tendon in this area. And we can see that form on our reference as well, if you look closely. Trapezius going up off the spine, the superior border of the spine of the scapula. I've just blocked in the 7th cervical vertebra and a little bit of the triangular diamond of tendon that surrounds this area. Just put in a nice separation for the kind of the break of the ribs going off either side. There's a bit of a depression. Blocking in the tail of the trapezius. As we investigate a little further, we'll start to see tail of the trapezius going up, but giving us that really complex overlapping with the muscle coming off here called the rhomboid. Right, so there's going to be kind of conflicting forms there as we go forward, and you can see them right here. Right, so you see some of this, and you see some of this form right here going up. And so we have to kind of pay attention to those kind of subtleties. Refining the deltoid and really looking again at the placement of the acromion process. So you can see the acromion process is going to be right here. We have this form of the medial head of the deltoid coming off. Then we have this little bit coming off the anterior border of the acromion, and coming off the bottom, the posterior border of the acromion, we have this. That's before we get to kind of the rear deltoid and the front deltoid. Okay, so you'll see me start to refine those areas. I'll just step back for a second. Looking at right now this kind of depression between the rear deltoid and the triceps coming back in here, right? So we're going to have a little tube of muscle coming off the arm. It's going to go back here, and it's going to interlock, as we know, between that and teres major going up. Teres major, lats, and rear deltoid going back. Okay. Starting to look at the armpit, refine the way that the walls of the armpit come together. Dressing on this side, the same thing we looked at on the other arm, coracobrachialis and the biceps. A little push and pull, and just really defining here what the head of the clavicle looks like. You actually, so we have all the chest muscle coming off of it, but we're getting a pretty pronounced roundness to it in this area. So just trying to put that in. You can see me quickly pop out the chest with the move brush. I had Alt pressed and popped it straight out, give it a little more volume. It was looking a little too flat and a little too pigeon-chested. There'll be a lot of these subtle pushing and pullings to the mesh kind of at a large scale as the sculpt proceeds, just to kind of establish and refine the volumes, the large volumes. Oh, neurovascular bundle just went in. You can see me popping it right there. And this medial head of the triceps, long head of the triceps, and this is the little tendinous depression on the long head of the triceps. Okay. This is probably a pretty intensive review for a lot of people who are on the anatomy course, just to hear all this stuff again and to see it as it works in. So in this area, we know that we have the spinal erectors going up, right? We have kind of a lateral mass coming in here, lateral mass coming in here. This is where the back of the external obliques comes up. And traditionally, I'm just going to kind of cross-hatch some stuff in here to get some volume. And then we have the iliac crest coming back. All right, so traditionally, and then latissimus dorsi coming down like that. There is a fossa, a cavity that sits right there between all these muscle groups, where nothing actually exists on a very lean person. You know, you kind of have to push in and you get to kind of the inner layers of the body, not literally, but the superficial muscles don't really cover that. And so what happens is we're protected by a big fat pad, and generally everybody has at least some fat there. And so that fills in, and you'll see at some point working our way forward, I'm going to go in and I'm going to block this in with fat. You can see I've just started to put in this mass, which we saw in the reference, and I've also blocked in some ribs, right? So out here, you can see ribs, and I'll just show you in the reference. We have all the muscle kind of up here. We have all the spinal erectors and those powerful muscles back here. We have a little bit of the border of the lats going up here. But this area is exposed, right? So you can see the little bit of the 12th. I'll just try to erase this annotations. So you can see a little bit of the 12th, 11th, 10th, and 9th ribs through here. So the 12th is going to be down here, 11th, 10th, and 9th, right? And that's kind of how it goes. And so I've just kind of indicated those schematically. And we'll start to kind of make those a little more graceful as we go. A little bit of the rhomboid just went in here. Remember, this is going to go back all the way up to the spine, right? In kind of this oblique fashion off the medial border of the scapula. Okay, I'm just going to step back. This, for me, right now is a big problem. And also, actually, this is a big problem. You can see the surface is going like this in kind of an extreme, which is nonsense. At some point, we'll have to address that and fill this in, because in this area, we have rib cage, right? So that should be the volume of the rib cage coming down, and it shouldn't be broken like that. So you see, I'm going to start to mass it in. And it's these kind of small assessments of your surface that you have to kind of do continuously as you progress, because it has to come together sometime, and when you notice them, fix them as quickly as you can. And it's all small improvements. And it eventually makes a big difference. Okay, so this is my still schematic serratus anterior on this side. And you can see this is the one that's going to be at the level of the chest, so this will have to get a little more subtle. These three we saw in the reference were quite pronounced, and this is its continuation back up to the scapula, right? And so what we still have yet to do is to to really kind of indicate and kind of smooth over this form with the latissimus dorsi. And also we'll start to look at some of the integration of these forms, these digits, with the external obliques coming down here. So just a little bit of refinement to the forms of the abdomen. You can see in this area I'm starting to look closely at how the reference is, just to really capture some of the uniqueness there in the transition from serratus anterior to external oblique to this top pack of the abs. Right? And you'll see as we go around, his abs are slightly different in each position. And this is what you get when somebody is breathing as they're on a turntable. Okay, so continuing. This is the part where you're happy that I'm not doing this live, because this would, you'd probably gouge your eyeballs out with your Wacom pen, having to sit through all this cross-hatching and building up a form. I'm just reversing to show you guys a quick assessment of the forms, you know, pulling up my marking menu and flipping through a few different lighting positions. Because it's really instructive to do this, and I do it quite frequently when it gets to a point where I'm interested in, well, I'm always interested in, but in a point where I'm looking critically at the volumes and how the light is playing off the surface. So if I hit it with some side light, we can see that the rib cage really does have enough volume and is giving me kind of the right planes going up, and we have the right planes established here. All right, so it's hard to really teach all of that. It's the kind of thing that you become familiar with from life drawing and observing form and practicing your drawing and your sculptures, which is why we're here. Okay, this far deltoid has gotten no attention, nor has the scapula, so it's finally going in. And again, the point of having the reference that I provide to you is to have both, hopefully, reference that is well lit and gives you kind of detailed surface form, but also to give you a concrete reference for kind of these things that you would very often generalize, right? And we want to really investigate these things that make the body unique in the different poses. And so this is what we've kind of seen in the anatomy class as that kind of tendinous wheel of the trapezius kind of going down, right? And it does really interesting things on him as it fans off. And it's the kind of thing you get when you have kind of subtle contraction of muscles in different parts, and you only get that in life. It's hard to really imagine that. Okay, so this is where I'm starting to look at some of the forms of the gluteal muscles. And we'll talk about those a little bit more in coming weeks. But also you'll see me start to fill in some of the fosses in the lower back. Missing part of the trapezius finally goes in. Okay, now I'm just really kind of putting the layers of layering the trapezius over top of everything else, right? Because these two forms, they sit over top of everything underneath. So rhomboids, latissimus dorsi coming back this way, spinal erectors going under. So I have blocked in the forms of all these other muscles at different times that we've seen, but now I'm just kind of in the final pass, so I'm just going in to really accentuate one last time the upper layer, which is the trapezius. And that brings us to the end of this sculpt. So in a short session, we've kind of done pretty well to go from that to that. And hopefully you guys can at least take some of the same steps along the way and really start to investigate the forms that make this. I mean, it's quite easy for me to sit here and talk about it as I go through what I've already done, but it's certainly harder to replicate it. But that's why we're here, and it's not going to be easy, but I want you guys to give it a good go, and above all, don't get frustrated, because at these points early on, even at the intermediate points, things can often look not that good, right? And that's one thing that I always have to deal with, is this stage where things look not good. You have to have confidence that as you continue to apply yourself and refine your vision, that your models will get to an end state. You just have to take your time to get there. And that's all. So I hope you enjoyed this little recap and little kind of instructional video on the male torso. Thanks.